Recently, in the comments of a lot of the bike reviews that I've been doing, people have asked me what I think about the RIP9 RDO, which is right there, versus the Stumpjumper 29 versus the Trance 29. So I figured what I'd do is just make a video talking about the differences between those bikes. So it's a rainy afternoon here, which is a perfect opportunity to just sit and talk about bikes. So let's first talk about the Niner versus the Stumpjumper, because those are very similar, especially in the amount of travel. So both have 150 in the front, 140 in the back. So the Stumpjumper I had, which by the way I don't have anymore because I cycle a lot of bikes through my channel, which means I'm buying them, using them for 2, 3, 4, 5 months, and then selling them to get another one, which is what I did with the Stumpjumper to get the Niner. So I had the Stumpjumper Expert, which had RockShox. If we're talking about components, so they both had SRAM Eagle GX, but the Niner has Fox, and not only Fox, but a Fox 36 in the front with Kashima coating. The rear is a DPX2 with Kashima coating. Perfect spec. I love Fox. I don't mind RockShox. I've had issues in the past. I think they've gotten better. I didn't mind the performance of the RockShox on the Stumpjumper, but if we're just talking about components, then I prefer the Niner. I also like the SDG dropper seat post on the Niner better than I liked the dropper post that came on the Stumpjumper. Now, one thing I really liked about the Stumpjumper Expert is that it came with carbon wheels, and I definitely prefer carbon. I don't mind the flows that came on the Niner. It's probably the best aluminum wheel set I've used so far for trail riding, but I still would rather have carbon. It just makes the bike more lively. It just makes the bike feel a little bit more agile. Now, one thing that I do like about the Stumpjumper also for my local trails and really for my riding style and all-around riding is the standard fork offset, or the 51mm fork offset. I'm going to be doing some reviews on the Niner, and I'm going to talk about the fork offset. It has its advantages and disadvantages, the 44 on the Niner. I just prefer that 51 offset on the Stumpjumper. It makes the bike handle tighter trails better, makes the bike feel less sluggish at more cross-country speeds. When you're climbing, it just makes the bike feel a little bit better. That being said, for fast, rough descents, the 44 is nice on the Niner RIP9 RDO, but if I had to take my pick, I would choose the 51. Something else that I really like about the Specialized, and Specialized is the only company that's done this so far that I've seen, I'm sure others do it, but it's the only bike that I've used, is they put 170 cranks on that bike, which is awesome. The Niner RIP9 has a low bottom bracket. The Trance has a low bottom bracket. The Specialized has a low bottom bracket, but the 170 cranks help you avoid pedal strikes. I had a nasty pedal strike on the Niner. I took my hands off the bars for like 2 seconds, and just happened that in those 2 seconds, I hit my pedal on a rock on a slight downhill and had a pretty bad crash. Resulted in a slightly sprained ankle, a banged up knee, and a scratch on my carbon frame. So these new bottom brackets that are lower, they're advantages. They feel great on the descents, but you've got to be so aware of pedal strikes when you're climbing, and if you're riding, you know, with the pedals down sometimes like I was doing. It was a careless mistake, I know, but it still happened. But with the 170 cranks, you get the advantage of a low bottom bracket with less pedal strikes. So I think Specialized hit the nail on the head for that. Now, if you're tall, you probably want longer cranks, but I'm not that tall. So if I had to take my pick, I would go with 170 cranks. Something that I also miss on the Specialized is that stupid SWAT box, which is like iMessage. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm an Android user, and I've heard people say that they can't switch from iPhone because of iMessage. They're locked into it. The SWAT box is one of those things that after you use it, you're like, oh my gosh, I wish every bike came with that. To be able to head out on the trail and not have to put a pump and tube and tire levers and a hex wrench, multi-tool in your pocket is so awesome. Now, I keep all that stuff in a bag and I just throw it in my hydration pack or my jersey pocket. But to not have to think about that, I think is something that I wish, like I said, every bike came with that. So what bike would I pick between the Specialized and the Niner? If I lived out west on the more open trails, I would pick the Niner because of the components. It's a more enduro style bike than the Specialized. There's no doubt about it. The Niner just feels more capable on rough terrain when you're going fast. If I were going to race enduro, I would choose the Niner. That being said, for my riding style and the kind of trails that I ride most often, I would choose the Specialized. I like the ride quality better. I ride on the East Coast where, you're descending and you're avoiding roots and rocks and you're avoiding a tree right next to the trail. So you need a bike that's just a little bit more agile. On more cross-country type trails, I like the Specialized better. It just felt more agile, a little bit more peppy. I think a few reasons. One is the carbon rims. The other is the more standard fork offset, so the shorter fork offset, less trail. Also the geometry of the Specialized, I think the head angle was about a half a degree or a degree steeper, which I like. I ran the Specialized in the high setting. I ran the RIP9 in the high setting. But the geometry is just a little bit more conducive to cross-country riding on the Specialized. So like I said, if I had to pick one for ride quality, I would pick the Specialized. Now, if we were talking components, I would obviously choose the Niner. And by the way, both bikes weigh about the same. I think the Specialized was about a half-pound lighter than the Niner, but like I said, the Niner is a little bit more burlier. And if you put carbon rims on the Niner, you probably drop the weight at least half a pound. So talking about weight is a good segue into talking about the Trance 29, which if you've seen my recent videos on the Trance, I'm loving the Trance 29. Let's compare the Stumpjumper to the Trance because that's a little bit better comparison. Both do a little bit better in cross-country type settings, so both are a little bit more versatile. Now, by the way, could you use the Niner as a more cross-country type bike? Yeah, sure you could. Do you want to ride with cross-country racers? Well, you probably don't want to do that on the Niner or the Stumpjumper. The Trance is a little bit better for that. If you're wanting to have a bike that's trail and cross-country, I think the Trance is the best of the three. The Trance also has carbon wheels, which is great. I like the suspension on the Trance a little bit better than the Stumpjumper in terms of how fluid it feels. The suspension on the Trance just keeps the rear tire hugged to the ground. Specialized has to rely on tuning of the shock a little bit more than Niner or Giant, because those are more virtual pivot type suspension designs. So I prefer the suspension design of the Trance over the Specialized. That being said, there were a few times where I hit some really chunky stuff where I got bucked around quite a bit on the Trance, whereas the Specialized just absorbed that a little bit better. Those situations were not common. And so I like the climbing ability of the Trance a little bit better. Both have pretty good solid pedaling platforms, so both the Specialized and the Trance, and the Niner for that matter, do really well climbing. The Trance has Fox because I have the Trance Advanced Pro 1, and I like Fox better. Even though the Fox components on the Trance aren't quite as high-end as the Niner, I still like them. They don't have Kashima coating, but they still work really well. Buttery smooth. All of them have SRAM GX Eagles, so the braking and the shifting are about the same. Now the Trance, by the way, doesn't have the lever reach adjustment on the brakes, which I wish it did, but it doesn't. Other than that, the components are pretty much the same. Now the Trance also has a 44 millimeter offset, fork offset, like the Niner, which I liked in most situations because the Trance is so light that you don't mind the extra sluggishness of the 44. That being said, I still would pick a 51. It'd be nice if you were able to have an adjustable fork offset. Like, that would be awesome. I don't think that's possible. But I do prefer the 51 in more cross-country type situations. If I'm riding up in the mountains, I like the 44. Now, I haven't ridden a Trance with a 51, so I may not like it. It may be a little bit too twitchy for me. But one thing that's great about the Trance is the travel is a little bit less, so it's a little bit more peppy, climbs a little bit better, but the angles and the fork offset and the bigger wheels and tires just make it feel better than a cross-country bike. So which bike would I choose, the Trance versus the Specialized? Honestly, that's a hard call for me to make. I think it's going to depend on what deal you can get, what your local bike shop carries. For more cross-country riding, I would choose the Trance. For riding up in the mountains, it's a toss-up. The Trance climbs better. The Specialized is a little bit better over rougher terrain. You're just going to have to decide which one is best for you. If I had to just pick one, if you just asked me right now, I'd probably pick the Trance. It's just, the suspension is so good, and in most situations, it feels like the Trance and the Specialized are very similar in the amount of travel it has. Now, when you go over drops and when you go over really chunky, rough stuff, I would choose the Specialized. But if you had to break those things down over a ride, it's probably only about 1% of the time I would need that extra suspension travel. But like I said, it is so close. I miss that stupid SWAT box on the Specialized. It's a toss-up. So like I said, if you just ask me right now, I'd pick the Trance, but they are so close that it's going to depend on, like I said, your situation, which one you can get your hands on the easiest. So was this video helpful for you? I had fun talking about the bikes. I love trail riding, so I could talk about trail bikes all day long. They're my favorite style of bikes out of all the bikes that I own. So any other questions or comments that you have, drop those below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Make sure you hit the little bell icon so you're notified when I upload new videos. I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching.